Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. When working on the cloud platform, a thing that keeps bothering you is the cloud cost. And especially if you are using your personal cloud account, say it for proof of concepts or practicing some YouTube tutorials, you want to be extra careful with respect to the cloud cost. And if possible, you also want to keep the cloud cost to $0. But practically speaking, it's not possible. So you cannot keep your cloud cost zero when you're learning things on the cloud, because you create the cloud resources, you orchestrate the cloud resources, and AWS or any cloud platform is going to bill you. In this video, I'm not going to talk about how to make your cloud cost zero because it is not possible, but I'm going to cover how to understand the AWS billing. We will learn how to check AWS resources running on different regions of your AWS cloud account. Then I will also cover some best practices, especially if you're working in an organization. Make sure you watch the best practices section. So let's get started. First thing that you hear when you start with a cloud platform, say it from a YouTube tutorial or some blog, people keep saying, once you are done with the demo or once you are done with the project, make sure you delete the resources. I'm sure every one of you might have heard it. And even if you keep that practice of deleting the resources, some or the other time when you are doing it from the UI, as a beginner, everyone starts with the UI. And when you do it from the UI, you might have missed one or the other resource. And AWS keeps charging you for that particular resource. After a month or after a week, you get notification from AWS that, hey, you are billed X amount of dollars. Now, this is when you realize, okay, I haven't deleted a resource. Let's go to the AWS billing and cost management section. So you get here and you try to understand the billing. As a beginner, you fail to understand. For example, even if you look at the AWS billing right now on my console, so it says month to bill cost is $26. And when I click on it, it gives you a graph, but it does not clearly explain. I'm talking from beginner point of view. Of course, if you are experienced, you know different ways of looking at it. But for beginners, they find it difficult to understand, okay, which service is actually charging me. You try to look at the different sections, you fail to understand which service is costing you. So what you need to do at this point of time? So if you have created resources through the UI, and if you fail to understand which resources are you are billed against, there is one service in AWS which is called as tag editor. Okay, so go to the tag editor service, resource groups and tag editors. And here what you need to do is apply the filters that I'm going to show you. So just say tag editor, this option here, go with it. Select regions as all regions. Select resource types as all supported resource type. Now, why all supported resource type and not all resources? Because tag editor at this point of time does not support all the 200 plus AWS services, but the most commonly used or most commonly built AWS services are available with the tag editor. I mean, it can help you with it. So all regions, all supported resource types, and just say search resources. And here you can see the list of all the resources that you have created. I have created a EKS cluster, as you can see here, and I forgot to delete this EKS cluster. Of course, I have intentionally kept it live, but to explain you, or to just tell you what is AWS charging me against. So there is a cloud formation with which I have created a EKS cluster, and that EKS cluster is actually live. So here you can see all the resources across all the regions. This will also give you things like IAM users, VPCs. Some of them might not be charged. So AWS does not charge you for everything. For example, if you have a VPC, by default, VPC is not charged. But when you have things like NAT gateway, internet gateway, or when you have a let's say a bastion host attached to it, or anything like that, only then a VPC is charged. Otherwise, it is not charged. So what you need to do is go through these resources. For example, there is a security group. I'm not charged against it. But if you want, you can delete it or you can keep it from the cost point of view. There is a NAT gateway you can see here. Now this NAT gateway is definitely going to charge me, right? So what I can do is I can click on this NAT gateway and I can delete it. Of course, there will be dependency issues because you are doing it from the UI, but I would say it is good if you run into dependency issues because you will understand what are the dependencies of NAT gateways, and to delete a NAT gateway, which other resource that you have to delete. So this is one good way of finding out what are the different resources, particularly if you are only using one region, which I would recommend the freshers or beginners. Do not create resources in multiple regions. You will get confused. You will fail to understand the billing. Sometimes you forget to delete the resources. So restrict yourself to one region. I usually use AP South 1. So I can do AP South 1 and I can say all the supported resources. Again, when I search, this time I will get less number of resources because I have restricted it to one region. Abhishek, can I do it from CLI? Yes, you can also do it from CLI. For that, what you need to do is first you need a security credential, right? So go to the security credentials and create access token for your IAM account or for your root account if you're using root. Just like create access key and you are going to get the access key as well as the secret access key. Once you have it, take your terminal and you can just say AWS configure, and you need to provide your access key ID, secret access key, default region, as well as the default output. Now, once you do it, just run this command AWS resource group tagging API get resources hyphen region followed by the region name. As I told you, if I'm using AP South 1, so I can just say AP South 1 and it is going to give me all the resources in AP South 1. So if you are comfortable with CLI, you can also do it. You can take this output into a JSON file, something like this, test.json, and you can also traverse through the JSON file. What if I have multiple regions and I want to use the CLI? Very simple. You can use a for loop for I in, let's say, AP South 1, US East 1, and then you can just do followed by this command $I followed by done. So you will get both AP South 1 as well as the US East 1. It might take some time for you to get used to it because you will have a lot of resources that are actually free to use, like the IAM users, or like I said, the default VPC. But once you get used to it, then it will become simple and you can keep your cloud cost as less as possible. But still, Abhishek, is there a way where I can say that my monthly billing has to be less than $10? Abhishek, I'm a student and I'm doing all of these best practices, but still I'm afraid if my AWS billing is going to go beyond $10. What can I do? What you can do is go back to the AWS billing service. And if you're working in organization also, you can follow this best practice. right? Which I'm going to suggest now. Even in your organization, for your particular team or for your particular org, you can restrict cloud cost to a particular number. How do you do that? You have something called as budgets. In the AWS billing service, you have something called as budget, where you can create a budget. You can also create a zero budget, where you can say, like, Abhishek, I don't even want $1 or $0.1. You can create a zero spend budget, but practically don't do it, because when you learn, you will have to use some cloud resources. For example, EKS cannot be free. So there is no point of using a zero spend budget. So create a monthly budget, and here just say $10 and provide a email recipient. When it exceeds $10, who should get it? Like, who should get the email address? Who should get the corresponding email? I mean, that your AWS budget has exceeded $10. And what AWS does is it will not email you only when the $10 is exceeded, but it is going to actually send you 3 times. First, when your actual spend is 85% or beyond, that is, if you take $10 for $8.5, you will get the first email. So you can be very careful. Then you get when it reaches $10. Then you get the next email when it exceeds the $10. So just create the budget and you will have this. If you want to understand the reports, you can also create a report for your budget. So this will help your management, especially if you're working in organization, where you can create monthly reports, budget reports, and you can share it with your management. Every DevOps engineer has to do it. Every SRE engineer, if you are taking care of AWS cloud cost, you have to do it. Now, Abhishek, are there any better practices? Like, okay, I understood everything till here, but what do you do when you work in an organization? How can you improve these practices? So there are few things that I'm going to cover. The very first thing, so you should definitely follow these practices. The very first thing that you have to do is try to reduce the UI access. I mean, whoever is trying to create the resources, even if it is the development team, don't create it through the UI. Always try to use infrastructure as code. So you should be going with, let's say, Terraform, or you should be going with CloudFormation templates, or you should be going with the AWS CDK or equivalent. Now, what happens with this is when you're doing resources through the UI, you can forget something. Like, you might have deleted all the VPC components, but you might have forgotten the NAT gateway. Whereas if you're using infrastructure as code, the chances are very, very less. Because if you have created resources through Terraform, and if you just execute Terraform destroy, it is going to take care of the dependency management, and it is going to delete the resources that you have created, right? So if you're doing through the UI, you have chances of additional cloud cost. Whereas if you're doing through the IAC, maybe Terraform, CFT, or CDK, your chances of AWS billing will be significantly reduced. And you don't even have to solve that dependency problems for you. Okay, now this is one thing. The other thing is least privilege. So this is not for freshers. This is especially for people who are working in organizations as DevOps engineers. Make sure you have least privilege set in place. Many people know about this concept, but they either ignore this or they don't want to do it because of the complexity. Complexity is not about setting up the process, but following it. What is least privilege? Least privilege says that give access only what is required. Of course, the actual meaning of least privilege is almost try to take it to zero privilege, where nobody can have access to create the resources apart from the DevOps team or the SRE team. But Again, in MNCs, you have some developers who want access to the AWS account. Sometimes your management need access to the AWS account. So in this case, least privilege is give access to the extent of only what is required. When you have a new developer, don't give them access to create the EKS cluster. Or to that matter of fact, why would you want to give a developer access to create a EKS cluster, or access to create a IAM user, or access to create a S3 bucket? Instead, make sure developers only have the read permission, and they will have to approach the DevOps team, or they get a Jenkins pipeline with only the resources that they can create. So you have Jenkins pipeline for IAM user creation, and you have Jenkins pipeline for EC2 instance creation. So they should only be able to trigger the EC2 instance. They should not be able to create the IAM user, just for example. So you should have least privilege in place along with the IAC that is set up. So by following these practices, again, you can significantly reduce your cloud cost. The final thing that I want to mention is the cost optimization. Of course, this does not completely come under the topic of billing management, but cost optimization, if you are doing this properly for your organization can at least save 50% of what they are running today. I'm talking about majority of the cases, because in a lot of companies, what people do is they create stale resources. So they create EBS volumes and they just leave the EBS volumes, or they create FSX storage and they just leave the FSX, or bunch of EC2 instances that are not being used in the organization. So as a DevOps engineer, I have also made videos on it. You can search for Abhishek.Veeramalla cost optimization, a very popular video on the channel in our AWS Zero to Hero playlist. What you can do with cost optimization is you can use services like AWS Lambda, write a Python script, and this Python script should look at list of stale resources. So you can write Python script for bunch of resources, like for 5 resources, you can write a Python script, or you can also use AWS config. If you use AWS Lambda, write a Python script or Node script or Go, and make sure you identify the stale resources. You can do 2 things after this. Either you can use SNS and send the email, or you can immediately take the action where you can fire a API command or talk to the API of a particular AWS resource that is stale and delete the resource. To make it timely, that is, instead of manually triggering the Lambda functions, you can also integrate this with the CloudWatch, right? Or you can write a cron job, or you can use the AWS CLI. And using AWS CLI and cron job, you can also trigger the Lambda function. So these are some of the things that you need to make sure, especially if you're a fresher. One thing that I'll tell you is, okay, this is something that you cannot avoid. If you're working on AWS or Azure, as you keep practicing, you will incur some cloud costs. So don't worry about it, but make sure you try to keep it as less as possible. Another thing that I want to mention is, even after doing all of these things, let's say you ran into the cloud cost of $100 and you are not in a situation to pay the $100. If your case is genuine, you can also reach out to AWS support. So you can talk to the AWS support, just send them an email stating that, I'm a fresher in, or I'm learning the cloud platform. I'm just getting used to AWS, and unfortunately, I could not delete few resources. Can you please waive off? So AWS lot of times will waive off your cloud cost as well, if you are a beginner and if your case is justifiable. So you can write them an email and you can get your AWS costs waived off. So don't get your account suspended or don't get your account deleted. Don't go with multiple credit cards. Just reach out to the support and get it waived off if your case is genuine. So this is the video for today. And some people might ask, Abhishek, what about Azure? Azure does very good job in this case. So Azure has resource groups which are very, very matured. If you are a beginner working on Azure, you can simply go to resource group and delete the resource group. Right? Beginners use the UI and Azure UI has the resource group. Just delete it and all the resources are deleted. So with Azure, it is very, very simple to limit your cloud costs. Thank you so much for watching today's video. See you all in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.